is the early morning of August 26th, 1346, northern France. King Edward III of England, recognizing that escape was no longer an option, boldly chose to confront his pursuers on favorable terrain rather than risk being ensnared by the advancing French. The English, under the shadow of the forest of Crécy, took their stand near the village. The strategic dance of war had led them here, as Philip of France chased the outnumbered English army across the Somme River. August 26th marked the convergence of these two juggernauts, the English making meticulous preparations as King Edward orchestrated the construction of a fortified enclosure. Ingeniously crafted from carts and carriages, the English positions was nestled between the protective embrace of Wikicommons, Crécy, and the River May. The topography itself conspired with the English, as a steep bank descended into the Vallée des Clercs, challenging the French's ability to maneuver effectively. Divided yet united, the English army stood organized into three formidable divisions, with knights transformed into infantrymen at the heart of each, flanked by spear-wielding soldiers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the stage was set for a clash that would echo through time, a symphony of strategy, sacrifice, and martial might. Around 1300, only half of the French kingdom was under the French crown. The rest was in the hands of territorial princes who recognized the king as their suzerain, and that was all. The English kings had held titles and possessions in France since the Norman conquest of England in 1066. As such, Edward III of England held Guyenne as a fief from the French king. In 1328, the male line in the French House of Capet died out, leaving Edward to make a bid for the French throne. After all, in the female line of King Philip IV, he was the grandson. It was then decided by the highest prelates and dukes of France to adhere to Salian law, which stated that succession should come from the male line. Philip VI was crowned. In 1337, Philip reclaimed Guyenne, after which Edward proclaimed himself King of France, and war was inevitable. However, both England and France faced financial challenges during this period, making full-scale invasions across the English Channel costly and precarious. Edward's forces defeated the French fleet in 1340, but it wasn't until 1346 that Edward had the necessary funds and supplies to attempt another invasion. The logistical challenge of moving a medieval army required extensive preparations, including assembling supplies, soldiers, and horses. In 1345, Edward's main army anchored in Sluys, but due to storms and delays, they couldn't take action before winter. However, Henry of Grosmont led a successful campaign in Gascony, defeating French armies and securing English footholds in the region. In 1346, a large French army led by John, Count of Normandy, besieged the town of Aiguillon. Henry of Grosmont urgently requested Edward's help, as he was morally and contractually obliged to aid his vassal. Edward began raising a new army and assembled a massive fleet of 700 ships, surpassing any previous English fleet. Despite the French's confidence in their fleet's ability to prevent Edward's landing, he successfully crossed the Channel. On July 12, 1346, the English landed in Normandy and began their march southward. They burned villages, looted the population, and stormed and plundered the city of Caen. The French suffered heavy casualties, and Edward sent his fleet back to England with the spoils and a request for reinforcements, supplies, and money. The French were in a difficult position as their main army was occupied with the siege of Aiguillon in the southwest. Edward's surprise attack humiliated the French, and he continued to plunder their territories unopposed. Philip ordered John to lift the siege of Aiguillon and march northward with his army. He would not arrive in time. Philip declared a call to arms for northern France. He called upon nobles and allies, including the renowned fighter John of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia, who joined Philip's cause, along with other influential figures from France, Germany, Luxembourg, and Bohemia. The French army consisted of knights, crossbowmen, and infantry. Edward initially aimed to cross the Seine at Rouen on his way to Flanders, but Philip stationed troops there. Edward then changed his direction, moving along the south bank of the Seine toward Paris to mislead Philip about his intentions. The French army shadowed the English on the north bank. After various maneuvers, the English found a crossing point at Poissy, 10 miles from Paris, and rebuilt the bridge. Edward's tactics, including sending his son, the Prince of Wales, known as the Black Prince, toward Paris, misled Philip into defending the city. The armies eventually reached the Somme River simultaneously, but Philip believed he had trapped Edward south of the river. Philip controlled the bridges and fords, and the English struggled to find a crossing point. Edward's desperation led him to seek information from prisoners, and a peasant revealed a ford at Blanche Tache. The English crossed at low tide, facing an ambush from the French. A fierce battle ensued at the ford, with longbowmen and men-at-arms driving back the French. As the French vanguard approached, the English successfully crossed the Somme, but a rear guard under Count John of Hainaut and King John of Bohemia attacked them. Edward's army escaped, suffering heavy casualties. Philip could not cross the river due to the tide. Seeing his supplies and ranks thinned out after the battle, Edward abandoned plans to join the Anglo-Flemish army, instead assembling near the forest of Crécy, where the outnumbered Englishmen decided to confront Philip. Traditionally, it is believed that Edward realized he could no longer outrun his enemies and chose to engage in battle on favorable terrain, rather than risk being pursued and caught by the French. After crossing the Somme, Philip of France withdrew his forces from Blanquetac to Abbeville, while the English moved northwards and camped near the forest of Crécy. On August 26th, they positioned themselves near the village, prepared to confront the advancing French army. The English made careful preparations before the battle. King Edward ordered the construction of a fortified enclosure using all the carts and carriages in the army, where horses and baggage were placed. They were snugly entrenched between Wadicourt, Crécy, and the River Maye. The topography of the site, with a steep bank leading down into the Vallée des Clercs, would have made it difficult for the French to operate effectively on a wide front. The army was organized into 3 main divisions, with one of them standing in reserve. Each division consisted of knights in the center, all fighting as infantrymen, with rows of soldiers with spears immediately behind them. According to different accounts, the vanguard was led by the Prince of Wales, supported by the Earls of Northampton and Warwick. The king himself commanded the centre division, accompanied by the Earl of Oxford and others, including Godfrey of Harcourt. The rearguard was headed by the Bishop of Durham, along with the Earls of Arundel, Suffolk, and Huntingdon. There are some variations in different chronicles regarding the specific commanders and their divisions. Some accounts mention the Earl of Stafford instead of Northampton, and there is no mention of the Bishop of Durham in one chronicle. These discrepancies may be due to changes in the command structure that occurred after the army landed at La Hougue. Historians have debated the organization of the archers in the English army. Geoffrey Le Baker and the Valenciennes account suggest that the archers were positioned to the sides of the main force, possibly in shield-shaped or triangular formations. This arrangement would allow the archers to avoid obstructing the men-at-arms and to have a favorable angle of attack. After receiving news that the English were near Crécy, Philip of France redirected his advance and sent a knight to reconnoiter. The French army was reported to be organized into 3, 4, 5, or 9 divisions according to different sources. On August 26th, the British spotted the French scouts heading north. Led by Antonio Doria and Carlo Grimaldi, the crossbowmen formed the French vanguard, followed by a division of horsemen led by Count Charles II of Alençon and the blind King John of Bohemia. Count Rudolph of Lorraine and Count Louis of Blois led the subsequent division, while Philip himself commanded the rearguard. Upon learning of the English's readiness for battle, the French contingents hastened their movement, jostling to reach the front, and knights left their accompanying infantry and wagons behind, causing a breakdown in discipline. Following reconnaissance of the English position, a war meeting was held. Though scheduled for the next day, some senior French officials, confident of victory, proposed an attack. In addition to speeches, another customary practice before the battle was knighting some soldiers. While the exact number is disputed, several individuals were raised to a higher status. Despite the army's fatigue from a 20 kilometers march and the need to reposition for a full-strength assault, the French launched their attack in the afternoon. The French army advanced with the unfurled oriflamme, indicating their intention to show no mercy. Whether it was Philip's choice or the result of mounting pressure from eager knights remains unclear. The Genoese crossbowmen were ordered to advance ahead of the French cavalry. As they moved forward, rain began to fall on the battlefield. The English archers, fearing the slackening of their bowstrings, unloaded their bows. The Genoese crossbowmen, equipped with leather bowstrings, faced no such concern. A duel ensued between the troops, with the longbowmen demonstrating superior range and firing speed compared to their opponents. The Genoese lacked their pavises and ammunition, which were still with the French baggage train. The muddy terrain further hindered their reloading process. The Italians were quickly defeated and fled. Some historical accounts suggest minimal casualties, with reports even indicating no hits. Then, Charles of Alençon ordered a cavalry charge. His knights and nobles faced obstacles from retreating mercenaries, leading to confusion and clashes within the French ranks. The English longbowmen continued their barrage of arrows, injuring many horses. They were accompanied by bombardments that intensified the chaos. Although the impact remains disputed, horses stumbled and threw off riders in the midst of the chaos, disrupting the French attack. This compelled the subsequent knights to navigate their way around the fallen steeds, further adding to the disarray. In the commotion, injured horses panicked and scattered across the hill, exacerbating the confusion. By the time the English knights and soldiers, with their tightly formed spear formation, confronted the French charge, they had already suffered significant losses, diminishing their overall strength. The fighting was brutal, with the large number of troops on the French side exacerbating the situation. Crowds tend to push forward, and many soldiers were crushed to death without visible injuries. The piles of dead bodies created obstacles for the French forces attempting to attack the English lines. Suffocation became a real problem as men clambered over each other. Among those killed was the Count of Alençon. Then Philip ordered a second charge. The fresh French cavalry positioned themselves at the base of the hill and initiated another charge. Despite encountering the same challenges as their predecessors, they faced an additional hurdle. The ground beneath them was strewn with the bodies of fallen horses and men. Nonetheless, they persevered in their attack, albeit in a disorganized manner that once again failed to breach the English defenses. The ensuing hand-to-hand combat endured for an extended period, during which the Prince of Wales found himself brought to his knees. In a bid to shield the prince's standard from capture, one account tells of the standard-bearer standing upon the banner itself. Described by a modern historian as a scene of terrible slaughter, the engagement compelled Edward to dispatch a contingent from his reserve division to salvage the deteriorating situation for the English. This intervention resulted in the French being pushed back once more, prompting them to launch yet another charge. While the English lines thinned out, the soldiers in the rear consistently stepped forward to fill the gaps formed in the front line. The blind King of Bohemia, John of Luxembourg, requested his knights to lead him into battle so he could strike a single blow with his sword. They tied their horses together and rode into the chaos of the battle. None of the knights survived this courageous but futile charge. Philip of France displayed bravery and was in danger of being captured, but he was saved by a count who led him off the battlefield. The French war banner, the oriflamme, was left torn and abandoned among the dead and dying. The exact number of French charges remains uncertain, yet their persistence endured well into the late hours of the night, even as dusk descended and darkness added to the chaos. Each charge unfolded in a familiar pattern: intense clashes on the battlefield, followed by a subsequent retreat by the French forces. The French side suffered heavy casualties. The king's letter to Thomas Lucy listed numerous high-ranking individuals who perished, including the King of Bohemia, the King of Majorca, the Duke of Lorraine, and several bishops and counts. Various chroniclers, such as Jean le Bel and the Valenciennes chronicler, provided additional names of prominent figures who were killed. Jean le Bel claimed that around 9 princes and approximately 12,000 knights, along with 15,000 to 16,000 common soldiers, lost their lives. In contrast, only 300 English knights were reported dead. Michael Northberg gave a precise figure of 1,542 men-at-arms killed, but didn't provide an estimate for foot soldiers. The German account by Matthias von Neuenburg portrayed the French as fleeing from the battlefield, with the archers retreating first, while the Germans remained to fight. They suffered significant casualties as a result. The aftermath of the Battle of Crécy saw no immediate English pursuit, and the exhausted troops were told to stand down but remain armed. King Edward dined with his men, expressing gratitude for their victory against the French. The next day, English soldiers unintentionally killed large numbers of French civilians who mistook them for their own troops. French casualties were heavy, and the English collected and burned the remaining equipment. The death of the King of Bohemia was mourned, and preparations were made to besiege Calais. News of the victory spread quickly in England, prompting reports and requests for supplies. King Edward concluded the campaign with the siege of Calais. After a grueling 11 months, the city finally succumbed. It granted the English a strategic foothold in northern France that would endure for the next 2 centuries. Moreover, this historic clash solidified the reign of the longbow as the paramount weapon on the Western European battlefield. Such was its prowess that English and Welsh archers found themselves in great demand as mercenaries, not only within the borders of Italy, but even as far as the distant lands of Hungary. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will already gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.